This food feels ancient, like it was always waiting for us to discover it. It wasn't. Take him out of history, and this food never shows up on your plate. Not he influenced it. Not he helped popularize it. Without George Crumb, there are no potato chips. Period. George Crumb is in the kitchen of Moon's Lake House in Saratoga Springs, New York. It's August 1853, and he's slicing potatoes thinner than any cook has ever sliced them. Not because he's trying to invent something, because he's angry. A customer. Some accounts say it was Cornelius Vanderbilt, robber baron, one of the richest men in America, sent his fried potatoes back to the kitchen twice. Too thick, too soggy, not salty enough. Complaining like Crumb's work is an insult to his refined palate. Crumb is the head chef. He's half black, half Native American, Huron tribe. He's worked his way up in kitchens where most people who look like him aren't allowed through the front door. And this man, this wealthy white man, wants to send a message about standards. So Crumb decides to send a message back. He slices potatoes paper thin, fries them until they're too crispy to stab with a fork, salts them heavily, and sends them out as a deliberate "fine, try eating these" response. But he's not just being petty. He's performing food science that won't be formally understood for another century. He's creating the most successful snack food in human history, and his name will be attached to it for exactly 20 years before the industry erases him completely. They took the recipe. That part is documented. It spread from Moon's Lake House to other restaurants, to street vendors, to commercial production. Everyone knew it came from Crumb's kitchen, but then they did something systematic. They kept the name Saratoga Chips but dropped the chef. They patented the manufacturing process and claimed invention. And they built a $27 billion annual industry on a technique a black chef created out of spite. This isn't folklore. This is engineering with receipts. You're going to see the exact food science that makes potato chips work, and why no one figured it out until Crumb did it by accident on purpose. You're going to learn the 4-stage system that transforms individual innovation into American invention. And you're going to understand why Crumb's name disappeared, because the erasure was more profitable than the truth. Long before potato chips, there were fried potatoes, thick cut, boiled, then fried, roasted, mashed. Potatoes had been in Europe since the 1500s, brought from South America. By the 1800s, they were common food, cheap, filling, versatile, but they were always soft. That was the point. Potatoes were filler food, sustenance. You boiled them, you baked them, you fried them in chunks. The goal was to fill you up, not to taste like anything remarkable. Fried potatoes existed in restaurants, cut into thick slices or wedges, fried in lard or oil, served as a side dish. The French had their frites. The British had their chips. Americans had fried potato slices, all thick, all soft in the middle. And the problem was consistency. Thick-cut fried potatoes got soggy fast. The outside crisped, but the inside stayed dense and moist. They'd cool down and turn into an oily, limp mess. They had to be eaten immediately. They couldn't be stored. They couldn't be sold as a product. People weren't waiting for flavor. They were trying not to waste potatoes. So why didn't anyone create potato chips earlier? Because no one with resources cared about the problem. High-end restaurants in the 1850s were copying European cuisine, French techniques, British traditions. If it wasn't already established in Paris or London, it wasn't worth attempting. They weren't experimenting, they were imitating. And food innovation required something most establishments didn't have: the willingness to risk failure. If you're serving Vanderbilts and Astors, you don't experiment with potatoes. You serve what they expect. The problem was obvious. Make potatoes that stay crispy, but the solution wasn't profitable. Until it was. And George Crumb, he was working in one of those high-end establishments, but he had something they didn't: the freedom to break the rules when he got angry enough. George Crumb, born George Speck in 1824 in Saratoga County, New York. His father was black, possibly free, possibly formerly enslaved. His mother was Native American from the Huron tribe. He grew up hunting, fishing, and learning to cook in a region that was becoming a wealthy resort destination. By his 20s, he's working as a chef. Not a cook, a chef, running kitchens, creating menus. In an era when most black men couldn't vote, couldn't own property in many places, couldn't enter white establishments through the front door, Crumb is cooking for the wealthiest people in America. He wasn't trying to change food history. He was trying to make something work in a kitchen where one complaint from a rich patron could end your reputation. Here's what we know from contemporary accounts. A customer orders fried potatoes, standard preparation, quarter-inch slices, fried until golden, lightly salted, sent back. Too thick, Crumb cuts them thinner, half as thick, fries them longer, sends them back out, sent back again. Still too thick, still too soggy. And this is the moment. Crumb could have made them the same way again. He could have ignored it, but instead, he makes a decision that changes food history. He slices potatoes as thin as physically possible, translucent, paper thin, so thin they can't be eaten with a fork. And here's the food science he's discovering in real time. When you fry a thick potato slice, the outside cooks faster than the inside. The exterior crisps, but the interior stays moist and soft with starch and water. That moisture makes it soggy. But when you slice a potato thin enough, something different happens. The entire slice has roughly the same thickness as the zone where frying occurs. All the moisture evaporates almost instantly. The starch gelatinizes and then dehydrates. You're not frying the outside and steaming the inside, you're frying the entire thing uniformly. The result? Complete crispness. No soft center, no moisture to make it soggy later. The chip stays crispy even after it cools because there's no water left to ruin the texture. The oil replaces the water in the starch matrix. The sugars caramelize. The proteins undergo Maillard reactions. That's the browning, the flavor. You get this golden, crispy, shelf-stable product that doesn't exist anywhere else in food. And then Crumb salts them heavily, more salt than anyone would put on normal fried potatoes. Because at this thinness, the salt adheres to the surface oil and gets locked in as the chip cools. He didn't guess, he tested, and what he created was technically perfect. Crumb sends them out. The intent? Make them impossible to eat with a fork. Make them so crispy and salty that they're almost a joke. A culinary find. Here's what you asked for. The customer loves them. And then other diners at nearby tables see them. They want to try them. They order them. By the end of the night, the kitchen is making potato chips for multiple tables. Within weeks, they're the signature dish. Saratoga chips. People come to Moon's Lake House specifically to try George Crumb's potatoes. They're listed on the menu. They're written about in local papers. They become famous. That one adjustment, that's the food you're eating today. And Crumb knows what he's created. By 1860, he opens his own restaurant, Crumb's House, and potato chips are the centerpiece. He serves them in baskets on every table, no charge. They're his calling card. Once it worked, everybody wanted it. Through the 1860s and 70s, Saratoga chips spread. Other restaurants copy the technique. Street vendors start making them. Tourists buy them as souvenirs from Saratoga Springs. Initially, they're made fresh. You can't package them. They'll break, they'll get stale, they'll lose crispness. So they're sold locally, made to order, consumed within hours. But then industrialization arrives. 1895. Mechanical potato peeler. 1920s. Continuous frying machines that can produce chips at scale. And most importantly, airtight packaging. Wax paper bags. Then cellophane. Then foil-lined bags. Now you can make them in factories, package them, ship them, sell them in stores hundreds of miles away. The technique stays exactly the same. Slice thin, fry completely, salt heavily, but now it's industrial. Companies form. Wise in 1921, Laura Scudder in 1926. She's credited with inventing the wax paper bag, making chips portable. Lay's in 1932, eventually becoming the biggest chip brand in America. Today, the global potato chip industry generates $27.5 billion annually. U.S. market alone, $10.6 billion. All of it, every single chip, uses the exact technique George Crumb developed in 1853. In 1873, a newspaper wrote, "Saratoga chips, the thinnest and crispest fried potatoes ever conceived, remain the culinary marvel that Mr. Crumb introduced to discerning palates 2 decades prior." Mr. Crumb introduced, not discovered, not adapted, introduced, created. That's 1873. 20 years after invention, people still know his name. They credit him directly. But watch what happens next. Here's the system. This is how you take an individual's invention and turn it into American innovation. 4 stages. First, geographic rebranding. You name the food after the place, not the person. Even while Crumb is alive, people start calling them Saratoga chips, not Crumb's chips. Not George's invention. The place gets the credit. Saratoga Springs becomes the brand. And here's why this works. Places feel neutral. Saratoga chips sounds like a regional tradition, like something that emerged naturally from the area. It doesn't sound like someone made a deliberate choice. It erases agency. Today, buffalo wings erases the Bellissimo family. Philly cheesesteak obscures Pat Olivieri. Nashville hot chicken downplays the Prince family. Geographic names sound descriptive, not attributive. Geographic rebranding. Second, industrial appropriation. Once the technique is known, anyone with capital can manufacture it. Through the 1920s and 30s, patents get filed. Not for the potato chip. You can't patent a food technique that's been public for 70 years, but for the machinery, slicing equipment, frying systems, packaging methods. Those patents list names: white men, mechanical engineers, business owners. They're not inventing the chip. They're inventing ways to mass produce what Crumb created, but their names get attached to the industry. Today, tech companies patent implementations of open protocols. They didn't invent the internet, but they patent ways to use it. They didn't invent social networking, but they patent specific features. Industrial appropriation. Claim the method of scaling, obscure the original invention. Third, narrative generalization. You rewrite the origin story as collective, gradual, or accidental. By the mid-20th century, the story shifts. Chips originated in Saratoga Springs. They developed during the 1800s. Sometimes they're called a happy accident, as if no one intended them. The story of an angry chef inventing something out of spite? Too specific, too individual, too black. So it gets softened into culinary evolution. The method stayed, the name disappeared. Today, creative work gets described as collaborative process to avoid crediting individuals. Films are team efforts. Music is co-written by committee. Narrative generalization makes it harder to say this person did this specific thing. Fourth, educational omission. You simply don't teach it. American history classes teach Edison, Bell, Whitney. They teach industrial inventors, mostly white men. They teach American ingenuity as a story of white innovation. Potato chips don't show up, and when they do, they're mentioned as trivia, not invention. Food history books give chips a paragraph, maybe a sidebar. Some mention Saratoga Springs, some mention a chef. Very few name George Crumb, and almost none explain the food science he accidentally mastered. Today, computer science history skips Mark Dean's PC architecture contributions. Medical history minimizes black doctors and researchers. The curriculum decides whose innovation matters. Educational omission. If this is so obvious, why didn't Crumb just patent potato chips and own the industry? Because food recipes couldn't be patented in the 19th century. And even if they could, a black man filing a patent faced massive barriers. Cost, access, legal representation, and enforcement nearly impossible. Between 1853 and 1900, fewer than 1,200 patents were granted to black inventors out of 440,000 total. Food-related patents by black inventors? Nearly zero. Not because they weren't innovating, because the system didn't protect them. So Crumb did the only thing he could. He opened his own restaurant, Crumb's House. Made chips his signature, but he couldn't stop other people from making them. He couldn't sue factories for using his technique. He had no legal recourse. And here's the psychological message that lingers. When the chip becomes American without being Crumb's, when the inventor is written out of food history, when it's called a lucky accident instead of deliberate experimentation, a story gets reinforced. Black people contribute culture. They don't create systems. They provide flavor. They don't engineer solutions. And when kids grow up never hearing George Crumb's name, they don't imagine black people as inventors. They imagine them as cooks. Different category, different level of intelligence. Let me teach you how to hear the erasure in chip language. When ads say classic American snack, what they mean is we've removed the specific origin and made it generically national. Born in Saratoga Springs means created by a person whose name we're not saying. A happy accident means we're framing intentional experimentation as luck to avoid crediting intelligence. Time-honored tradition means we're making it sound ancient and collective instead of recent and individual. Listen for language that makes invention sound passive. Discovered, emerged, became popular. These words remove the inventor from invention. This isn't history, this is current. Every chip you eat is made using George Crumb's 1853 technique. Slice thin, fry completely, salt heavily. That's it, that's the formula. We've added flavors. Barbecue, sour cream, jalapeno. We've added shapes, ridges, kettle style, wavy. But the core process, unchanged. The global chip industry generates $27.5 billion annually. Americans eat 11.2 billion pounds of chips per year. And George Crumb, mentioned in approximately 5% of food history materials, usually as a footnote. Zero major chip brands credit him. Zero museums are built in his honor. His restaurant is gone. His story exists in historical society records and old newspaper archives. That's it, but the correction is happening. Historians like Jessica B. Harris and Michael Twitty documenting Black culinary innovation. Food writers like Adrian Miller ensuring Crumb gets named. The Saratoga Springs African American Heritage Trail acknowledging his contribution. And there are educators rewriting curriculum, teaching that potato chips have an inventor, that invention isn't white by default, that food is technology. You're part of that correction right now. George Crumb invented the potato chip in 1853. It wasn't an accident, it was experimentation. The industry built on his technique generates $27 billion annually, and his name belongs on every bag. Here's what you can do. When you eat chips, know they were invented by George Crumb, a Black chef. Support food historians documenting Black culinary innovation. Question food marketing that calls inventions American classics without naming creators. Teach that cooking is invention and Black chefs are inventors. Here's my question. What other foods do you eat every day without knowing who invented them? If this surprised you, there's more sitting on your plate. Leave it in the comments, not your guess, your curiosity. What food are you ready to see as someone's invention? Nothing this good